Hello everyone. Today I'm going to show you how to make potato leek soup. I'm using a crock pot, however you could do this on a stovetop as well, and sometimes it even comes out better that way. If you're doing it on a stovetop, you'd just saute the onions and leeks first with the butter and oil, and then you'd add everything else in. Other than you'd save the coconut milk and the lemon juice for kind of the very end, and then simmer until the potatoes are soft enough. Before we go on, here's what you'll need. A small onion, 5 medium potatoes, 2 bay leaves, a half teaspoon of thyme and rosemary, dried works well, some butter, 5 cups of vegetable broth, ground coriander, garlic, salt, and some pepper, and coconut milk. As you can see, we'll start with chopping the leeks. We're going to want to slice those into thin slices like I'm doing right here, and then we're actually going to want to rinse them in water in a strainer, as you can see right here. Leeks, because they grow on the ground, they can get a lot of dirt and sometimes even kind of sandy dirt inside of them, and then when you're eating the soup it'll come out as a little bit of grit, which we don't want. So most vegetables you can just rinse, but leeks it is really important to kind of thoroughly rinse like this. I nearly forgot, similar to a green onion, with a leek you'll only use sort of the bottom half below the dark green spot. Next, we'll dice the onion like so. There are a lot of ways to dice an onion. I like doing it this way, where you cut almost all the way through, as you can see here, and then it easily dices most of it and leaves that one end that you just dice on its own, if that makes sense. But any way that you feel comfortable with works. If you're going to use a blender or an immersion blender, you don't even need to be quite as focused on how small it's diced if you plan on completely blending everything. If you're just going to mash the potatoes at the end, you probably want to make sure that it's a little bit more evenly diced, so that you don't need to worry about big chunks of onion towards the end. If you haven't already, make sure you take that time to rinse the leeks off. I've tried it without doing this to make it a little bit faster, and it has ended up with a little bit of that grit that can happen, so I really recommend doing this step. Moving on to the potatoes, the original recipe that I used for this calls for russets, and I think that can give like a thicker texture, but I like baby reds for a lot of different things, so that's what I tend to have around. So I tried it with those this time, and it turned out really well. Whatever you prefer, or whatever is on sale, or I think any potato that you like is probably going to taste good for this, but russet does get that creamier, kind of starchier texture. So we're going to dice those up. Again, any way that you're used to dicing a potato works well. You want them to be pretty even and small, especially if, like I said, if you're not going to blend or use an immersion blender. But if you are going to do that, again, it doesn't have to be as meticulous if everything's just going to be blended at the end. This is where, with a slow cooker, it gets really easy, or if you're doing it on the stove, you'll just saute everything, starting with the onions and garlic and leeks, and then toss everything else in along with the broth and just leave the coconut milk and the lemon out until later. But for the crock pot, we will just throw everything in except for the coconut milk and lemon juice, and we'll let it go for anywhere from 6 to 8 hours. I think 6 is probably enough, but if you're going to be out or something, you can leave it a little bit longer. Really, anytime that the potatoes start to be as tender as you want, it's done. So you could even turn it on high and do more like 3 to 4 hours instead. So we're just going to let this go and add the coconut milk and the lemon juice towards the end, and then that's when we can blend it up or use an immersion blender, or if you don't have either of those, we can get creative with other kitchen utensils that you might be able to mash the potatoes up with if you're okay with having a chunkier soup. It'll taste just as great. The recipe says 3 to 4 cloves of minced garlic, but honestly I usually put a little bit more, and if you don't have fresh garlic or minced garlic or any of that, garlic powder will work as well. So with everything in, we can give it a little stir just so that everything's mixed quite well. You'll actually see that mine looks creamy already. I accidentally added the coconut milk in the beginning. I think it tastes a little bit better if you wait until the end, because then it doesn't cook the milk with it. So then we'll let it go for around 6 hours. Now once you add the coconut milk and the lemon juice or apple cider vinegar in place of lemon juice, you'll blend it up. Like I said, an immersion blender works best if you're going to want to blend it and then eat it right after, because you don't have to worry about letting it cool to go into a regular blender. Otherwise, if you like a chunky soup, you don't have to do any of that. I'd recommend maybe mashing it with a big fork or something if you don't have any of those, so that it does blend a little bit, and you may even want to use a little bit less vegetable broth if you're not planning on blending at all. And as you'll see here, it can cause a little bit of splatter, so if you're doing an immersion blender, be very careful. And if you're doing a regular blender, like I said, you're just really going to want to let that cool first and then maybe warm it back up after blending. So with that, that's it, and we can top it up with any toppings you might like. You could add some green onions on top, and it's really good with some warm toasted bread. Enjoy!